Everyone, this is Jeff Kenney, Museum and Archives Manager for Culver Academies, with the latest installment of our Wednesday walks through Culver history. Today, as you can see, we're in a little bit different spot. I'm surrounded by some foliage and this sort of rough metal looking stuff. We are in the Culver Bird Sanctuary, and the Bird Sanctuary goes back, it's actually celebrating its 90th birthday this year. It goes back to 1930. It was the effort of really several elements coming together. Of course, Culver's Woodcraft Camp had started in 1912 under the direction of Boy Scouts of America co-founder Dan Beard, with some real input from Ernest Thompson Seton, who was a great naturalist and conservationist, among others. Actually, by the late 1920s, Culver developed a relationship with a well-known author and naturalist and fisherman and outdoorsman by the name of William or Smilin' Bill Vaught, V-O-G-T, Vaught. Culver founder, Henry Harrison Culver's son, E.R. Culver, who at the time was president of the trustees of Culver Military Academy, was a big supporter of creating this unique place in which I'm standing now, which is one of my favorite spots actually in the Culver area. Yeah, some people have asked, why is it called a bird sanctuary? I mean, I walk into this woods, there are birds, but it doesn't necessarily seem like a bird sanctuary. Well, the sort of bit of remnant of the original bird sanctuary has a bit of a story to tell us here. Originally, this metal formed quite a wide circle here on this raised bit of land. It's a bit off the beaten path. If you hike or jog or in any way go through the bird sanctuary today, you're probably coming through on the main trails. So probably starting at the intersection of State Roads 10 and 117, or maybe from our council ring, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. But this path is a little bit overgrown, a little bit more obscure. It takes you up next to what was a pond here at the bird sanctuary as of 1965, which we'll talk about in a moment, into this raised ground, which at the time contained some 600 birdhouses, if you can imagine that. And there were 100 to 125 different species of bird that were kind of contained in this large area. So there was a fenced-in area with kind of a wire mesh top. There was a fountain and a pond in here feeding water to the birds and wildlife. There was other wildlife here. The Indiana Department of Conservation provided some 100 pheasants to the area, including in this sanctuary. Why was this all here? It was here for nature study. The woodcraft campers of the day had very specific nature study requirements, and there was sort of a large blind, if you will, that allowed the woodcrafters to come in and observe the birds and other animals actually in their natural habitats. It was quite a large area for observation at the time. And by 1931, there was a fairly elaborate log, kind of rustic-looking entryway to the bird sanctuary that had been added. The land at the time that was primarily the bird sanctuary was not the full scope of acreage that we know today, nor was it as wooded as we see today. A lot of it had been farmland, some of it was forest, but in the early 1930s, it had not quite been as forested as it is today. Today it runs to the east all the way to Queen Road here in Culver, and of course it's bordered on the south by State Road 10. Just in the last handful of years, Culver acquired a number of acres of additional land to the north that added a lot of woodland and trails to this land. And of course, riding trails are a prominent use of this space for many years, and we have added ones now today with the addition of extra land. When the bird sanctuary opened in the early 1930s, there was a bit of a flurry of media coverage. There was even some celebrity interest. Some of you alums may remember, as I do, the children's books of Thornton Burgess, who wrote Peter Cottontail and other stories. We have a letter in the archive from Thornton Burgess on his cartoony letterhead asking then General Ginolette, who was still superintendent of Culver at the time, if he could come and see this beautiful bird sanctuary. Vaught would go on to design several other sanctuaries like it around the country. He dies not many years later in 1936, and I might add that one of the people he worked with was the school's head gardener, a man named August Wennerstrom. August Wennerstrom was a Titanic survivor, a survivor of the 1912 sinking of the Titanic ship, and he came to Culver in 1913 and served almost to his death in 1950 as gardener here at the school, and told the students the story of surviving the sinking of that ship. He was one of the prominent folks who worked on actually facilitating the bird sanctuary under the direction of Vaught in 1929-1930. By 1949, a major renovation was undertaken of the bird sanctuary with 125 new birdhouses added. Okay, I'm standing here in kind of a hidden, obscure, overgrown location here in the bird sanctuary. It's kind of hard to see in this shot, but if you can see these railings around me, I'm standing on the old dam This was created in 1965 here in the bird sanctuary, kind of in the southern section. It was created really to facilitate a kind of fishing pond for woodcrafters, more for the summer program than anything. But ironically, in the next few years, it actually became the home. It really gave birth to, was the genesis of our current hockey program. Of course, hockey goes back to at least 1908 when we had a varsity program at Culver, but that had faded many years earlier. And in the late 1960s, a hockey club was formed, playing hockey here on the ice at this pond, obviously in the winter months during the boarding school season. This hockey club would evolve soon into competitive play, and by 1975 construction was underway for the current hockey rink, which was at that time an outdoor rink. It didn't have a covering. That's added a handful of years later. The hockey rink opened in 1976. I might note that in 1982 there was a torrential flood that flooded the whole area here, and that really was the end of the beaver pond here at the bird sanctuary. All right, so of course I'm standing here at the site of our council ring, where for a century council fire dances have taken place as part of the Woodcraft program. The original council ring was actually on campus very briefly for just a handful of years after the launch of the camp in 1912. We don't know exactly what year this site here on the west end of the bird sanctuary became the home of the council fire ring, but it's very early, certainly by 1920. And originally those programs were not the Indian dance, Native American dance, Indian lore programs that they would evolve into. They were really scouting awards programs with a bit of dance and lore mixed in. And of course they evolved over the next few decades into really all dance and all Indian lore oriented programs. This backdrop that you see really dates back to the late 1970s. For most of the existence of the council ring, there was a large boulder that was kind of the backdrop for most of the 20th century to this ring, and of course the seating has expanded and grown from really just a few planks and logs to seating for a full audience and full production. I might just add before we conclude our tour, many of you alums will remember maneuvers and mock battles taking place throughout the bird sanctuary, particularly in the 1960s and 70s. That of course has gone by the wayside. But the beautiful just trails and the topography, which is fairly unusual for northern Indiana, which is heavily flat, is another beautiful feature of the bird sanctuary. And hopefully you've had a chance to take advantage of it and to take advantage of some of the programs and some of the offerings here. Once again, this has been Wednesday Walks Through Culver History. I'm Jeff Kenney, Culver Academies Museum and Archives Manager. We're here every Wednesday at 4 p.m. on Culver Academies History Facebook page, and we hope to see you again next week.